So the business world these days appears to be running as fast as they can away from DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Today's guest, that's kind of his bread and butter. And I was surprised in our conversation to find out that not all companies are running away. In fact, a lot of companies are still embracing these initiatives, this idea of everyone being included, everyone being valued, everyone being given a voice and being allowed to rise to their potential to contribute to the global good is actually stronger than ever in a lot of places. And yeah, the language has changed because of this anti-woke agenda, but the work goes on, and it's challenging work, challenging for all of us. So I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, Keith Edwards, who's going to be talking about how we can all rise up and become better allies in a movement of collective liberation. So without further ado, Keith Edwards, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thanks for having me here, Dr. Howie. I'm really excited to be with you on these screens across the Atlantic after having breakfast with you there in Barcelona.
That's right. I'm the envy of all my neighbors with that roll of Gorilla Tape you brought from the States.
It's the little things, I guess, right? It's the little things.
I did. I went to the local hardware store before you came, and I was like, what's your strongest tape? And he gave me a tape that was like, you couldn't like cut it or break it, but it didn't stick very well. So my Spanish is not sufficient here to explain what I'm really looking for. I want the kind of tape where you stick it to your dashboard and like 9 years later, you still can't get the stain off.
That's right. That's right. Well, now you got some. I'm sure you're being very frugal with it and making it go a long way.
It sure is.
Yeah.
So we are not here to talk about Gorilla Tape, although I would love to get them as a client.
Sponsorship.
Or Liquid Ass. Either one is really
I saw that one.
Yeah. No, we're here to talk about you and your work, and I reached out because I'm honestly looking for guidance and hope and inspiration. It's like the person who suddenly has to go to church every day to hear the same sort of sermon over and over again, because I've been in a kind of a bad place, not feeling particularly effective, and I know you've been in the Make the World a Better Place gig for decades now, and I would love to lean on you and your experience and your hopefulness to kind of guide us all as we navigate this intensely weird epoch of human existence.
Yeah, talk about existential crisis. Great. So let's start there. So just say a bit about me. So I'm a speaker, author, and coach. I organize my work around, as you said, empowering better tomorrows. I do that through better leadership, learning, and equity. And the secret is that everything I do is about leadership, learning, and equity. Sometimes I'm just primarily focused on the leadership and bringing those other things along. Sometimes I'm primarily focused on the equity part and bringing those other things along. But those are the three things I'm always working with. And I feel you. I feel the same thing. I was on a conversation earlier this week, and the sort of get to know you prompt was, what brings you joy? And I said, to be honest, I'm having a hard time with that right now. I'm having a hard time with that. Maybe that's the end of winter here in Minnesota in the U.S. I think it's a lot about the news and what's going on in the world. I think it's some things in my own life as well, but sometimes it's harder to do that. And I think joy is a renewable resource, right? It is a thing that we can cultivate even in the face of hardship and challenge. And maybe those are the times when it's most important to cultivate in the face of hardship and challenge. As you mentioned, I really think a lot about hope. I think hope, like gratitude, is not an emotion or circumstance we await, but is a practice. So I think about hope as a verb, like I think about gratitude as a verb, like I think about love as a verb, not as a thing you see if you have or not, but a thing that you put into practice. And I love the definition of hope as tomorrow can be better than today, and I have a role in making that happen. And so when I feel helpless and hopeless, which I've texted that to a number of people over the past couple of days. I put my focus on, in what ways could things be better? And how can I see that? And really, like, literally see it, visualize, see it. And then I think, what could I do to contribute to making that happen? Not that it's all on me and I have to do it by myself, but what could I do today that could contribute to making that happen? And, you know, I lead workshops, I work with teams, I work with senior leaders. That's useful. I also parent a 15 and 13-year-old girls. That's pretty daily opportunities to do a little something that makes their world better, their friends' world better, them better, which then makes the world better. And then, you know, today's conversation is a great opportunity to bring a little bit of hope and a little bit of agency to folks who maybe are feeling that hurt, anger, and despair, but don't want to stay stuck there. So hopefully we can offer some guidance on that for you, for me, and maybe some folks who are listening.
That's great. That's great. As I think about it, maybe the problem is my elevator here in Spain, because there's you know, the word hope and the word wait are the same word in Spanish. And so there's a button that says, you know, in case of emergency, press button and hope.
Which isn't a lot of agency, right? It's just like you're up to the circumstances of the world, right? But what is it that you can do beyond pressing the button, right? What is it that you can do?
Yeah. So I'm struck by those three words: leadership, learning, and equity, and the fact that only two of them are allowed in U.S. government websites anymore. I assume leadership and learning are still okay.
Yeah.
But you're working in a field that has been demonized and attacked. I'm wondering, what has changed for you? Like, before we get into like all the stuff, like just current events, like what has changed in your life and your experience of your work over the past month and a half?
I want to say everything and not much all at the same time. I think I'm still committed to equity. Although the acronym DEI has bad brand recognition at the moment, diversity has great brand recognition. So does inclusion. And so does equity. And so I think what we're facing are a lot of disingenuous arguments about those things. One of the tricks that we see being played often is misdefining a thing to then make it bad, right? We see a lot of this. Mindfulness gets misdefined, and then we use that misdefinition to just dismiss it as inconsequential and selfish and white, when it's rooted in 3,000 years of spiritual traditions, predominantly of non-white folks. And so I think, you know, one of the things I'm really eager to do is, when people really want to genuinely and honestly engage, I am willing to do that with anyone, anywhere. But those who are disingenuous in their efforts, I'm just not going to put my time there. So I have continued to work on equity. I have continued to talk about equity leadership. People are really resonating with that. Many people are resonating with that more than ever. It feels more urgent. It feels more pressing. It feels more salient. How
do you define that?
Well, let's talk about those three terms. So I'd never liked the acronym DEI because I think it takes away the power of those actual words, and it's being misdefined in lots of ways. But I define diversity as sort of composition. How can we bring more different voices, people, perspectives? And we can think about that in terms of race and ethnicity, in terms of gender, in terms of geography, in terms of political perspective, in terms of world point of view. So that's diversity. And then inclusion is those people don't just gather, they actually have a voice. We actually care what people think. We actually ask people, I haven't heard from you yet. What do you think? And bringing in and valuing and honoring lots of different perspectives, viewpoints, ideas, life experiences. And then equity is about recognizing that those aren't just differences, that some of those differences are given more power and status in the structures that we have. and trying to remove those barriers where they are unfair and unwarranted. And so equity is about recognizing that not only are there racial differences, but there's also racism. Not only are there class differences, there are also class structures in place that reinforce those things. And equity is about recognizing those differences and trying to remove the barriers that are unfair. We should probably point out to people who are listening and not watching that I'm a white guy in the U.S. Who's heterosexual and benefits from a lot of different privileges. And I think one of the things that is important to point out is that people like me have a pretty critical role to play in addressing these things. And if it's just left up to the people who are harmed by these systems and structures, and we place all the burden on change on them, that is another one of those ways that those systems and structures reinforce privilege and power and dominance. And when people like me recognize not just how others would benefit from equity, but how I would benefit really tangibly and pretty directly in what I call enlightened self-interest, it really shifts how we show up, how effective we are, how consistent we are, and how sustainable we are in doing that.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, there's a lot, so I'm trying to see where.
Yeah, I'll follow your lead anywhere you want to go, Howie.
I know. I'm trying to. I'm waiting here. I'm waiting here for my brain bust to decide which direction it wants to go into. I guess one question is, like you said, you still have work. Like part of my mind is thinking about. I have a cousin who works on HIV and community health in South Africa. He's out of a job. He had to fire 2,000 people. Is there so we've seen some very high profile companies say, okay, well, Target, whatever, we're just going to stop doing DEI. We're going to stop doing this stuff. As if it was some kind of racism in and of itself. And now that we've come to our senses, are you finding in the current business marketplace that there's still a commitment to this? And is it based on like people wanting to virtue signal and do the right thing, or is it based on bottom line, like this is just good for business? Like what is there's been so much shaken up around this. What do you see landing as the dust settles?
Well, I said, nothing changed and everything has changed. So I think one of the things that has really changed is people are really shifting the words they use, the language they use, and what they are sort of front facing with. And so I have a lot of folks that I'm talking with that say, we would love to do equity leadership work with you, but that invoice will never go through. Can we just call it leadership work? And I say, yes, we can do that. And then they say, but we want you to do all the same stuff. Just keep it off the invoice. I work with some of these corporations, none of the ones you mentioned, but some other ones that you could have mentioned. And what they're saying is, yeah, we're going to play this game. We're going to not call our module for our onboarding diversity and inclusion, but we are going to call it healthy workplace.
As you said both of those, just it's leadership and it's healthy workplace. I kind of like those better.
Right. Well, and I think when you really think about things like leadership, how can you talk about leadership without talking about power? How can you talk about leadership without talking about how do you connect with people who are different, right? Because every person you lead and supervise is different from you. I mean, my mom and I are super different, right? We have a lot of life history the same. And so when you're talking about these things, and I'm working right now on, a significant contract that's kind of related to the government. And they just said, you just can't use those words in the proposal. No problem. That's easy to do. But we're going to talk about some other things that are going to get at those ideas. So the way I'm thinking about it is if I need to change my language to avoid some disingenuous criticisms and arguments, I'm happy to do that. But I'm going to continue doing the work. to your point about virtue signaling and performativity, I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where George Floyd was murdered in June of 2020, less than a mile from my home. And so what we saw then was a lot of virtual signaling and performativity. And one of the things that's kind of nice about this moment is that anyone who was doing it because they had to, because they thought they needed to do this to check a box, no longer needs to do that. And to be honest, I don't want to do that work. I don't want to be in the room where the CEO is like rolling their eyes and like, I don't want to be in that room. But if they're saying, you know, we can't call it this, but we really do want to help our employees better communicate with each other. We want them to better understand themselves better. We want to remove barriers so that everyone feels fully included and can participate in this workplace. We want to help those who've had the least voice have more voice. And if there are things in our organization that we can do to make that better, we're really committed to that, then I'm super eager to help those people. And so what I'm focused on is the work. And if we need to call it healthy workplace environments, okay, that's fine. And so for me, what it has done, it has eliminated some of the performative check the box kind of stuff. And it has brought forward people who say, no, we're still serious about this. And a lot of the large companies that I work with are saying, yeah, I mean, we're changing what goes on the webpage and we're changing what, you know, our the sort of big front-facing things, but we're still, I mean, for the betterment of all people is still our founding mission. Mm-hmm. Like, we're not changing that. And so how can we do this better? Yeah.
Gotcha. So in the aftermath of the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter surgence, where, you know, everyone changed their Instagram picture to a black square for 2 days.
Yes.
You know, there was a lot, you know, I certainly got caught up in a lot of this. I listened to, like, you know, the entirety of Robin DiAngelo's audiobook on white fragility. And I was like, you know,
jogging right back there on,
jogging up the hill and getting like, as things sort of settled a little bit, I found myself disagreeing with a lot of what I had felt like I felt sort of environmentally peer pressure to be like, to be a good guy, I've got to agree with all of this. And at the same time, as a coach and a leadership guy, I'm like, that there's things about that approach that I think are just going to create backlash as opposed to benefit. And I'm wondering how you have navigated, you know, all these years, as you say, you know, being a het cis white guy from Minneapolis, seeing, you know, the philosophy of equality changing over the years. Like, how do you navigate the ups and downs, the fads, the research, to do your best work and be in integrity?
Well, the short answer is I return to a mantra that has been taught to me over and over again, which is, would you rather be right or would you rather be effective? And a lot of days I want to be right. I open up the computer, I look at the news, I scream into the abyss, and I want to be right. And I want to be outraged, and I want to feel morally superior, and I want to be righteous. I want to be self-righteous. And then I calm down and I think about what's going to move the needle, what's going to make a difference, what's going to make the world a better place tomorrow than it is today. And that's about being effective, and that's about being strategic. And I see a lot of folks, particularly who are the most marginalized, exhibiting that outrage. And I completely understand it. I completely understand feeling completely invalidated as a human being when you go to work, or when you're in your commute, or when you're seeing the news. And I think that's one of the things that I'm reminded of as someone with a lot of privilege that the system often benefits in ways that I didn't earn and don't deserve. And, I have a lot of benefits that I did earn and I did deserve. But a lot of things come with having white skin and being a cisgender man who's easily recognized that way, that I didn't earn and don't deserve. They just come with that. And so I'm always thinking, since I don't have those daily life experiences of microaggressions and macroaggressions, so I don't have to face the continued toll or the continued questioning around racism, around sexism, around other forms of oppression, then I need to get to the place out of self-righteousness and into effectiveness as quickly as I possibly can, because it's going to be easier for me to do that than others who are facing those daily harms and hardships. And so for me, it's about what is effective rather than what makes me feel right and morally superior, because I don't think that moves the needle forward. And one of those things I mentioned earlier, anyone who is willing to genuinely engage in the conversation, I'm happy to do that, whatever their political perspective. What I am uninterested and unwilling to do is engage in conversations with people who just want to throw arguments at me and hope to catch a one little snippet that they can publish in their right-wing newspaper to make me look silly. Like, I'm not interested in playing those kinds of games. And I've fallen into those traps before. And so for me, and I think this maybe moves us to the aspiring allyship, which is a thing that I've thought about a lot and honestly think about every day, for my own accountability and my own noticing about my urges or my frustrations, or my sort of pulls to not the best of my nature, to hold me accountable and offer me some reframes to maybe help move forward. Because I think most people want to work toward more good, more inclusion, more equity in the world. And then we get in this, but is this the right way or is that the right way? Should I be doing this or should I be doing that? Or what might, virtual signaling or performativity, what might get me criticism? And then a lot of us sort of, I don't know, maybe tomorrow, right? And we do nothing through overanalysis, which is a very dominant culture sort of thing to get caught up in.
So what do you do in organizations around this aspiring allyship? Because there is for myself, of course, I'm a good guy, and I it's very important that everyone recognizes me as a good guy, and it hurts a great deal if someone accidentally, mistakenly thinks that I'm not a good guy, right. And that has, and I, in myself, I've noticed that one of my strategies for that is to stop having my own ideas and to just say, well, if Ibram Kendi says it and I disagree with it, that makes me a bad person. Mm-hmm. And then I'll read someone like Thomas Chatterley or some of the black conservatives. Mm-hmm. I'm blanking on the guy's name. He's one of my favorite writers for the New York Times, linguist.
John McWhorter.
John McWhorter, brilliant writer, very challenging, and he'll talk about microaggressions in terms of we're mistreating people when we coddle them around this, and then I'm like, well, now there's two different people, and they're saying different things, and they're black, and so which how do I be a good person here? Which one do I? Yeah. You're both right. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's a very common experience, and I think we all want to think of ourselves as a good person, and we want to be seen as a good person and acknowledged. And I think that's a human experience. One of the things that really helps me is thinking back to all the things that I thought or said or disagreed with 20 years ago that now I am embarrassed and ashamed I thought or said or disagreed with. And I was a good person then. I wanted to be seen as a good person. And I just look back and go, I hope no one remembers that you said that thing. I also think that's a human experience because we are not fully finished, right? We are all works in progress. One of my mentors, Tracy Davis, is a very accomplished scholar, and his bio ends with, and Tracy is wildly unfinished. And I love this notion that we are all wildly unfinished. Tracy's nearing retirement. He's written a dozen books. He's won every award in the world, and he's wildly unfinished. And just the permission slip that gives to... brilliant people change their mind. Brilliant people shift their perspective because they're engaged. And so there's such a pull towards certainty. Let me just talk about the aspiring allyship in the most simple terms as possible, and then we can unpack that however you want. So I started thinking about this, it's 10, 15 years ago. And I was thinking about my own aspiring allyship and how sometimes, I started thinking about why am I better than others? Why am I doing good and they are terrible? And then I started thinking, well, no, I do some of those things too. So rather than how am I different than others, I started thinking about why am I sometimes better than I am at other times? And this, what I'm about to talk about, sort of precludes people who think equity is stupid and white people are really discriminated against and men have it harder than anybody else. So they're not even on the board. But if you recognize that there's harm happening in the world and you want to do something about it, now you're sort of on the board that I'm talking about. And I think about this in terms of how we think about ourselves. So I talk about aspiring ally identity development, and allyship isn't an identity, it's something that you do. So we want to be clear about that. But I think how we think about ourselves as aspiring allies shifts our effectiveness, the outcomes, our sustainability, and so forth. And so I started thinking about when I thought about myself as an ally to a particular person. My friend John just came out, so I don't want anything to hurt John, right? So that's kind of one. To another group, which is I don't want any women I know to experience sexism. And so I want to speak out against sexism and patriarchy so that no woman anywhere has to deal with this nonsense and violence and speaking over and not being heard and marginalized. To then what I call the ally for social justice is where we recognize that all of us are harmed by systems of racism. Obviously, people of color or BIPOC folks experience racism. And even though I, as a white person, benefit significantly in tangible and real ways from the way the system benefits white people, I would be better off without those benefits. That eliminating racism against people of color would make my life as a white man enormously better. And I actually pay a pretty huge cost in the world that I live in as a result of the racism in the world that I live in. The murder of George Floyd's a great example. I mean, that really messed up my life. It really messed up where I live. It messed up my community, the economic costs. I was worried about white supremacists in my neighborhood as the protests were happening. I went from thinking that a global disease killing 1 million in the U.S. alone was my biggest problem to the next day, that wasn't my biggest problem. The safety of my family was. And continues to have implications. So that's just a really tangible example about how a very racist thing against a person of color, or how systemic racism in that situation, in the Minneapolis Police Department, in the city, in the world that I live in, really also harm me, while I also maintain a lot of benefits from being a white person in the same world. So how do we navigate the both and of that? And I think when we think about ourselves as being an ally to my friend John, who just came out, we only speak up when John is around, right? And when we're doing it for others, when we want to protect women and make sure that women don't experience sexism, we're ignoring trans folks. So that's one part of the problem. And then two, that sort of savior, hero, rescuing things puts me in a position of power and reinforces some of those dynamics. It's super patriarchal, right? To think that women need my help rescuing them, when really what they need is men to stop doing this nonsense and the systems and structures to change. And we get super defensive, and it can lead to burnout when we're doing it for them. But when I recognize that systems of power that benefit me also harm me, we can talk about that in societal ways and relationship ways in terms of my own sense of self, then it doesn't become about this charity that I'm doing for others. It becomes like this whole world that we live in, it's just a group project. It's just one group project. And if we can make the world a better place for some people, it makes the world a better place for every single one of us, including me, including my white family, including the community I live in, including the world that I live in. And I think that's one of the tricks that people are doing right now, is they're saying that efforts at inclusion are discrimination because they're only helping these people, when really efforts at inclusion do help these people, and helping these people helps all of us, right? If you work in a company where your women employees don't feel like they matter and are ever going to be heard, that costs the company a lot of money, good ideas, attrition, innovation, leadership, capability. And better efforts at inclusion around those women employees would make the company better. It would also give men who are in the company, who are leadership roles or are in other roles at the company, they would benefit from all of that input as well. They would learn, they would grow, they would develop, they would have more things, they would have more ideas. Everyone wins in those situations. And when we recognize that, it really shifts things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of specific companies where, it was led by these mediocrities of the guys who looked like they could be CEO one day. I don't know who your clients are, so I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble by mentioning, say, Boeing as an example that had a macho culture of promoting mediocrity over excellence. But it was kind of the opposite of if the view is that DEI is somehow privileging people who don't deserve it. It's the exact opposite.
Right. It's the exact opposite. DEI is saying people who have deserved it have not gotten the opportunity because things have been set up unfairly, and let's make things fair. That's really what it is. And so this notion of meritocracy instead of DEI, if we had meritocracy, we wouldn't have ever needed DEI. But we have racism and classism and sexism and all of these things. And so we've needed DEI to make things a little bit more fair. And let's be honest, decades of these initiatives have not made things fair. They've made them, in some slightly measurable ways, a little bit less unfair. But we still have a lot of work to do. And that is threatening and scary to people who feel like this is a zero-sum game, that if some people gain, others don't. But the things that we really want in this world are not finite resources. They're in abundance, like joy, like freedom, like economic security, like liberation. Like, you feeling more free today does not make me less free, right? You having more economic security actually increases my economic security. It's not a zero-sum game. But we get tricked into binary thinking, zero-sum game, adversarial, and what happens is people in power get to maintain their power, while people who have less power argue over who's bad and who's good.
Yeah, in my neighborhood, everybody having enough money means I'm a lot safer. No one's going to rob me. No one's going to break into my house.
100%.
And if the next town over is doing well, then they're not going to come here. And
right.
There's...
And they might come here and buy some paintings, right? Which then gives the art gallery more money, who then maybe they have more resources to tip a little bit more when they go out to lunch, which then makes the server that you have happier and more eager and happy to see you. Like, it's just, right, joy, freedom, these are all things in abundance, but we're tricked into a different game.
Yeah. Have you seen, I think it was season 3 of the TV show Atlanta? It was an episode called The Big Payback.
I've never seen Atlanta, but I hear it is outstanding and phenomenal, and I'm a big fan of Donald Glover. It's a miss. You're right. I'm writing it down. Say more for folks who haven't watched it like me.
The Big Payback, and I'm going to have to do a little spoiler just to make it worth bringing up, is that it starts out that the Supreme Court has just decided on a reparations case where a black guy whose ancestors were owned by a white guy who's very wealthy could claim reparations. Significant. And so now you have this huge flurry of lawsuits, and people are, chaos. And then, there's some protagonists who go through a whole thing. And then at the end, it's just like the drama is over. And then you see this restaurant in which the white people are all the servers. The black people come in dressed really nice. They're the customers. And the amazing thing is everybody's relaxed. It's like, oh, this burden is gone. I'm crying now. It was so beautiful.
Yeah.
To see like we are free. And it wasn't about the black people being free. It was about the white people being free.
Yeah. And I think one of the lines that I love from my own article, and we'll share links and stuff in the show notes. Yeah. But one of the lines that I love is that when we are doing it for our friend and things don't go well, we tend to give up. That's easy to do. When we're doing it for the group who is harmed and things don't go well and we get criticized or there's consequences, we tend to get frustrated. We tend to get defensive. I start run my resume. No. I don't think you understand. I'm Dr. Keith Edwards. I have a PhD with a concentration in social justice education. I've written all these articles. You don't, right? Which is the most ridiculous thing ever. But when we recognize that, in this example, that addressing unfairness and inequality toward a particular group of people who have been harmed also makes my life better. As you talked about, the town makes you safer, people nicer. Then when it gets hard, we tend not to give up because it's not for them. It's also for me. It makes my world a better place. And so when I think about speaking out against sexism and patriarchy so that some mythical women benefit and it gets hard, I get frustrated and I could lead to burnout. It's not very sustainable. But when I think about the ways that sexism and patriarchy police my behavior as a man every single day, limit how I get to express myself or think about myself, how the expectations of men demean and degrade me and other men, lead to violence against women, but also violence against men, right? So if we could get rid of all of that, my life would get better today. If we could snap our fingers and get rid of racism, my whole world would improve dramatically today. And when we recognize that, then when things get hard, we go, oh, but I want to be more free too. I want them to be more free and I want to be more free. So now what do we do? And that really brings us back to where we sort of began, which is if that's your mindset, then self-righteousness just is self-serving. It's not going to make me more free. It just might get some cool social justice points on social media. But what can I do to really address the problem and the issue to help more freedom, better relationships, better connection? For me, a more accurate and honest sense of self that isn't deluded or delusional. That's better for my well-being. That's better for my mental health. That's better for my authenticity. It helps me be a more courageous and grounded and centered leader. And you were sort of sharing the example earlier about when we're not grounded, when we're not centered, when we're not clear about our purpose, then it is so easy to be dissuaded by reading Robin DiAngelo and think, okay, now I need to think this. And then reading John McWhorter and thinking, oh, now I need to think like this. But when we are grounded and centered with our purpose, then we can hear these perspectives and say, oh, well, I agree with that and not quite that. Or I'm not sure I agree with that. I want to think about that. And I hear this perspective. I like that. And that makes sense this, but not that. That we stay grounded and centered. One of the things, analogies I often have for coaching is if you think that if you're waiting for the hurricane to pass and the world's circumstances to bring you calm, peace, and joy, to be polite, you're going to be screwed. But as a coach, I'm trying to help my clients find joy, peace, and groundedness in the midst of the hurricane. So while all of this swirls around them, they can be grounded and centered. And in the conversation we're having, make choices about how they want to lead toward greater equity and inclusion for all of us.
So earlier you talked about mindfulness as an example of how the words can be strawmanned or straw-personed. Is mindfulness actually like a part of this work that you do with people around, navigating the? A Sean Colvin song just came to mind. Is it riding shotgun down the avalanche?
I know Sean Colvin. I don't know that lyric, but I think the way I define mindfulness is being fully present in this moment. And then being fully present in this moment. And if you think that is soft and easy, try it. One of the things I do is I work with my colleagues, Drs. Brian Arau and Don Lee. We have a program called Evolve Your Leadership Voice. And one of the things that has emerged, and that's for senior leaders who want to better lead around the issues that we're talking about. And one of the things that really emerged from the participants this past year is the leadership power of slowing down. The leadership superpower of slowing down. And leaders were talking about getting an email from an outraged constituent and needing to respond, and the leadership power of slowing down, taking a breath. Maybe I'll respond to that after my next meeting rather than right now. Or getting really harsh feedback one-on-one from one of their supervisees and being really unloaded on and feeling like this is unfair. I didn't even do this. Why do you think I'm a good person? And the leadership power of just slowing down in that moment and listening and hearing and not being reactive, but slowing down enough so that we can choose our response. And saying things like, I hear you, Howie. It's really hard for me to hear this. But you're important, and I want to hear it, and I want to take it in, and I really want to think about it. So let's talk next week. And I promise you, I won't ignore this. I will really think about it. And let's talk next week. And we'll begin by hearing where you are a week from now, and then I'll share with you sort of what I'm thinking and how I'm responding. I think that will be better for both of us. And the leadership power of slowing down is really about mindfulness and being grounded. And I think one of the things that I'm trying to work with leaders on is how can you more often feel grounded and centered so you're less triggered, which I know is a passion of yours, so you can feel that you have the tools to slow down so that you can feel less reactive and more, this is the response I want to choose from my values, from my core, from my personal foundations to move forward. Now, that won't always lead us to being perfect, but most of those dumb things that I wake up at 3:30 in the morning going, oh gosh, I hope no one remembers that I said that thing on that podcast, are things that I said when I was reactive in that moment. And for me, I think, and this for me comes from the Book of Joy, which is kind of written by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. They talk about shifting from that a sacred pause helps us shift from reactivity to choosing our response. And just the naming of, am I reactive right now? Or am I choosing a response? Like, I know, right? Like I know when I'm reactive and I want to be reactive and I feel like I deserve to be reactive versus choosing a response. And that sacred pause can be respond to the email in an hour. It can be a deep breath. It can be count to 10. It can be wait a week until you have that fight with your partner. It can be lots of different things.
So how do you help people operationalize that? Because it's a fairly simple concept to grasp and say, okay, so I'm going to implement the sacred pause. I think there's that wonderful line by Viktor Frankl, right? Like between the stimulus and the response lies our freedom. One of my mentor and friend and co-author, Peter Bregman, wrote a book called 4 Seconds, which was all about like the value of taking 4 seconds before you react.
Yeah.
And for myself, and I know all about this, but when I get triggered, what happens is the blood goes to the part of my brain that wants to bite.
Yeah.
So, and how do you see helping people when you're asking them to make a cognitive choice in the moment, and their cognition is that of a saber-toothed tiger rather than a Homo sapiens?
Yeah. Yeah, same. Me too. The way I operationalize this is I explain this, and the first step I tell my coaching clients is get really good at noticing when you're reactive and when you're choosing a response. And don't kid yourself and don't lie to yourself. Like, I'm reactive. And even if you make a choice in that moment that you regret, like what was going on there was reactive. So just noticing, for me and my biology, and I think the body is a great tell, right? When my face is flushed, when my heart is racing, when my armpits are sweaty, I'm reactive. For me, I don't want to bite. I want to run out of the room, right? So that's a fight, flight thing, very human. When I want to run out of the room, when I want to throw up my hands in disgust and run out of the room, I'm reactive. So that's, I think, a first very practical thing is the noticing. And that might be a week's homework, is just the noticing. Thankfully, the world will provide us many opportunities in the next week to practice this. The second thing is, what I often ask my clients is, I run through some of the examples of a sacred pause that I just gave you, and I say, what are your favorite sacred pauses? And they're all different. And there's not like a good sacred pause or a bad sacred pause. It's the ones that work for you. For me, sleep is a credible sacred pause. So if I'm having a really difficult situation, sleep, waiting until tomorrow, or even a nap, or just, it might be 12 minutes, but just the reboot and can be really helpful. For me, meditation. For me, activity, going for a walk, going for a run, helps me tremendously. Music that shifts my mood is really great. But then I have clients who, count to 10, or I say the serenity prayer, or I just need a moment by myself, or box breathing. Like there's a whole number of different things. And different things will require different things. I might be reactive in a moment and need to take 3 deep breaths, and now I'm able to choose a response. I might be having a fight with my partner. I might need a week to get out of that reactivity. So they're not all the same. And then I think sort of a longer process. So there's noticing, there's what's your favorite sacred pauses. And I think each of us having a menu of like 6 to 8 that are ones that we love and really work for us, and which ones do I want to choose in this moment, can be really great. And then I think to be reactive, to feel reactive is so human. So don't feel bad when you're reactive. Just like that's a human response. You're having human emotions. Congratulations. Just don't make big choices in that moment. You're not going to make great life decisions, right? If you're reactive and you want to quit your job, that's a very common thing. Most people feel that way once a week, once a month. Just don't quit your job in that moment, right? If a week later and you're no longer reactive and you really think this is no longer the right situation for you, then make that decision. But every time you're upset, don't quit your job, right? Every time you're upset with your partner and want to scream this thing that you've been thinking for the past month, maybe don't do that. But maybe you want to share that as a choice when you're no longer reactive. So one of the things I often say is, notice when you're reactive, don't feel bad about it, allow that reactivity, feel it in your body, feel your heart rate race, feel your armpits get sweaty, feel your face flush, notice that you want to run out of the room, notice that you want to bite. These are very normal human things. You're doing great. Just don't make any big choices right now. Wait till that comes and goes, and then make choices and decisions that are aligned with your foundations. And that's, what are your core values? Who do you want to be in this world? What is your best self? And if you're making choices in line with that, you might still decide to quit your job, but that's just very different than doing it in a reactivity when your boss has got you flames coming from the side of my head, which is a Clue reference.
Yeah, I'm imagining AI in a few years, there's cars that won't let you drive if it senses that you're inebriated.
Yeah.
Like my computer will like read my smartwatch and my face and the size of my pupils, and will not let me press send.
Yes. Wouldn't that be great? I mean, that would be awesome. But in that moment when we're reactive, we think they deserve to know. I deserve to hit send. And if it makes them mad, then they've earned this. Like, right? There's all sorts of rationale for that, and it might make you feel better in the short term. I usually find it doesn't. We think it'll make us feel better, but it doesn't actually.
Yeah, no, it's like, oh, did I do that? Like the best thing Google ever did was the 30-second undo timer for emails.
Yes, absolutely. I use that frequently.
What else would you like to talk about? I feel like I'm just, at the Keith buffet and everything's delicious.
Okay. Well, let me just say a little bit more about each of these places in the Aspiring Allyship. So when we're doing it for our friend John who just came out, or for a particular person, or our daughter, or an employee we supervise, and we don't want them to experience these harms from these systems, we can do good things, but when that person isn't present, we can fall into contributing to those same things. Right? And so my example of this is when I was in college, I didn't want anything to happen to this woman who I was dating, and I was very protective of her for all sorts of really genuine good reasons. And because she went to a different school, when she wasn't around, I would not only allow those things, I would sometimes participate in them. So I was not a very good ally. And that's why I use the language of aspiring ally, because I don't think we get to name ourselves allies or not, but we can be working on it. When we're doing it for them, for the marginalized or minoritized group, we can do a lot of good work, but the trouble there is we're doing it for them, so we become dependent on their praise and affirmation for our continued motivation. And that's a way of placing the burden on them. And when we misstep, which we always do, and we get criticism or feedback, we get really defensive. And what we often are doing in that moment is we recognize the privilege we have, we recognize the past harm that we've done, and we want to distinguish ourselves from other members of the dominant group. White people do this horrible stuff is a way of saying, but I'm not like them.
Yeah.
Can you believe the terrible things that men do in this world is a way of saying, I'm an exceptional one. Right? So we're distancing ourselves from other members of the dominant group. And one of the things I recognize is that I'm often not just distancing myself from other members of the dominant group, I'm distancing myself from previous versions of myself that I can no longer tolerate. The person who said that thing or did that thing. And when we recognize that this is a group project, that addressing racism benefits me as a white person in tangible and real ways, and we get feedback that says, hey, love the presentation, love the workshop. I thought that joke you made midway through was actually a little bit racist. If I'm doing that for them, I'll get super defensive about that. But if I recognize that racism is also ruining my life, I don't get defensive about that. I go, really? I have no idea how that joke could be racist. I would love for you to help me because I know that those things are in me and I want to unlearn them. And so if you could help me understand how something I didn't know was racist was actually racist, that is not something for me to be defensive against. That is a gift toward my own liberation. You can help me free myself from that bit of racism. A really great gift that I got was when I was a junior in college, and Cornel West spoke at my college. Cornel West is a brilliant thought leader around race and racism in the United States, especially, and does a lot of global things, particularly around Palestine and other marginalized communities. And one of the things he said in that talk more than 25 years ago was the white supremacy he had inside him by how he was socialized in this world. And as this black man who taught African-American studies at Harvard, who was giving this talk, who had written so many books about race and racism, if that guy can have white supremacist thoughts in him, I just remember sitting there and going like, it's over for me. Like, I should just give up trying to pretend I don't. And I was spending a lot of energy trying to convince others and mostly myself that I wasn't racist. And in that moment, I just went, well, obviously I am. And so rather than denying it, now I want to learn how I am so I can be less racist. Of course, I'm going to have racist thoughts and say racist things despite all my really good intentions. And if I can help unlearn that, then I get a little bit free from it. So now if I'm thinking in that mindset, and this happens regularly, is I get criticism or feedback, I get defensive, and I go, oh, I'm getting defensive. I need to cultivate my own enlightened self-interest. This is a thing that benefits me. Okay. And that helps me go, okay, help me understand what you're talking about. I really want to know. And not like help me understand so I can be defended against it, but like that's really helpful for me. And then I say, thank you so much. This is such an important gift that you're sharing with me. I was just doing a virtual workshop and someone emailed me afterwards and said that my metaphor was a little mixed, and in indigenous cultures they talk about it this way and not that way. And I was like, oh, I've never thought about that. You're right. My metaphor is mixed. Having this indigenous context is something I had no idea about. And now I'll still use that metaphor, but I'll do it well. And I'll have this additional indigenous context. That is such a gift to me. Thank you so much for helping me learn, to helping me unlearn. And I think a lot of what we need to do is unlearn.
And of course, that goes far beyond this conversation, right? It's like when I go through life and I can be undefended because everything, everything anybody tells me, is it true? Is it useful? Is it beautiful? Like, it's all information. A lot of what people tell me is information about them and not me. And I can, have developed the wisdom to be, to not get hurt. But I also, talking about like making people from marginalized communities do the labor. If I can be undefended, then they don't have to worry about how they say it so that they don't hurt my feelings, because I'm one of the less bad ones.
Yeah. And you're welcoming it and you're curious about it and you're genuine and you want to do that unlearning. And I think you're right. I think one of the things that happens is we can also say, I hear your feedback. I'm not defensive. I don't think I agree, but I appreciate your feedback and I'll do that. And when we see this as something, addressing inequities as something that benefits those who are harmed and also those who are privileged, then our focus isn't about pleasing people of color and making them like us. It becomes about racism. What we're talking about here is not making people of color like me or absolve me from the harms. It becomes about how can we create less racism in this world. And we might disagree about that. We might disagree about strategies. We might disagree about what is racism. We might disagree about that. And we can have those disagreements, but it's not about being reactive or being defensive. It's about really engaging. Sure. I also think that sometimes we're performative in our efforts, which is not great. And I think oftentimes our step to genuinely acting as aspiring allies, a step to getting there is performativity, to doing it as virtual signaling a few times and then realizing, no, I actually mean it.
Yeah.
I'm not just doing it for the virtual signaling. I actually mean it. I really do. So I think performativity gets a bad rap. I think it is not helpful in many ways. It actually can do harm. And I often see it as, well, you're on the path. Yeah. You're on the road. Now, how do we move you from this performativity, disingenuous, to actually meaning it, believing it, more sincerity?
Right. I would rather have people around me virtue signal than vice signal.
Yes. Yes. That's a great line. I'm stealing it. I'm going to use that.
Of course.
Credit Howard Jacobson.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. It reminds me of there was a study about commitment where they went. The researchers went and asked people to put lawn signs about safe driving on their lawns, and very few people agreed. Big, bulky signs. But in another similar neighborhood, they came and they asked people to put small window decals about safe driving. Mm-hmm. Most people said, yeah, what the hell? Then a few weeks later, they went back and asked those people about the lawn signs. A significant number said yes. Right. So if I'm virtue signaling, I'm also signaling to myself. And the less self-aware I am about the fact that I'm virtue signaling, the more I'm actually softening up my identity so that I can become a better listener and a better ally.
Right. Well, and as you know, we think that we need to change attitudes and beliefs, and then people will change behaviors. And a lot of science has said if you change behaviors, then they start to believe. So do we need to teach people that recycling is a good thing and then they'll recycle? No, you make recycling so easy that it's actually hard not to do it. And then people start to really value recycling. So how do we create patterns and pathways that make things that are better for us all easier, accessible, without difficulty? And I think that's one of the things that many of us who are academics need to do is we need to make what we're doing much more accessible. And conversations like this are a good example. I mean, I've got a 17-page article about what we're talking about today, and it might be hard for some of the audience to get through, but this conversation I think people can relate to and connect with, and it can be helpful and practical, and we did it without being self-righteous, I hope.
Yeah, well, now you've ruined the moment for me because I was about to quote Audre Lorde, but now it's
great. No, do it. I love Audre Lorde. Do it.
Now it feels like I'm showing off and being highbrow.
Well, it's part of the pathway, right? It's part of the pathway.
I'm gonna do it.
Go ahead. I want to hear your Audre Lorde.
The true focus of revolutionary change is never merely the oppressive situations that we seek to escape, but that piece of the oppressor which is planted deep within each of us.
Yeah. I love it. Let me return one. This is from Lilla Watson, who is an Aboriginal activist in Australia. If you have come to help me, please go home. But if you have come because our liberation is bound together, then we may work together.
Oh, can you send me that?
I will.
Cool.
I will. I'll send that to you.
Going in my my quote book.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a slide I end most of my talks around equity on, is that one. That this is a group project. We're all in it together. And when we're trying to save or rescue other people, we actually do a lot of harm. But when we're recognize that our liberation is bound up together, then that's a great place where we can work collectively and collaboratively to move things forward, all playing a different role, which is, in short, everything that we've been talking about today.
Well, I'm feeling much better. So my body is ready for aspiring allyship. It's ready for action. I feel like you've given me some space and grace, which I very much appreciate. Who do you work with? So we could end with a little advertisement for Keith Edwards. Who do you work with? How would they know they should get in touch with you, and where do they find you?
Yeah. I do a lot of work in higher education, helping senior leaders in higher education and organizations move forward. I do a lot of work with nonprofits and foundations around strategic planning, staff, and board retreats. And I do some equity consulting, or maybe some better workplace consulting in some corporate realms around improving what they do around leadership, learning, and equity. If folks want to get in touch with me, keithedwards.com is a great place to go. You can find everything there. And if people want to stay connected, the best way to do that is I have a newsletter every Tuesday morning. I send out the latest of what I'm thinking around leadership, learning, and equity. This morning, a newsletter went out about enlightened self-interest. And so that's went out this morning. It's totally free, no pitches, no nonsense. And then additionally, the first Saturday of every month.
People find that at keithedwards.com, or is it Substack? Or?
Yeah, it's at keithedwards.com. It's just an email newsletter. And if you go to my website, it should be really hard to avoid that newsletter coming at you.
Well designed.
And then, yeah. And every first Saturday of every month, I also share a bonus newsletter of everything that I'm learning, contributing, and enjoying, which is podcasts and book recommendations and things like that I'm loving. And then also music recommendations, TV shows, movies, fun things like that as well.
Could we end with a recommendation for a musician or a piece of music, a TV show, and a book?
Oh my gosh. Yes, great. So musician, my favorite band of the moment is Cloud Cult, which is from here in Minnesota. They're a band that talks about, kind of got organized around the lead singer's son dying at 2 years old and the spiritual implications of that. So Cloud Cult is a great musical recommendation. TV show, we just finished season 2 of Tokyo Vice. And so if you are into Japan, it's all in Japan and a lot of Japanese. Season 2 is better than season 1. And a book, the book that I am currently recommending is called Service Berry by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Robin Wall Kimmerer. It's a very short. It's about less than a 2-hour audiobook. It's a great read. Actually, it's somewhere there. It's the book that I sent out to some of my favorite clients at the end of last year. She's an indigenous person who is also a biology professor. And so Serviceberry is all about lessons from indigeneity and the world of nature for how we can better structure economic systems in the U.S. and the world.
Fantastic. And if people are wondering where they've heard that name, she was the author of the longtime bestseller,
Braiding Sweetgrass.
Sweetgrass.
And Serviceberry is like another chapter in Braiding Sweetgrass. So if you love Braiding Sweetgrass, you should do that. If you've never heard of Braiding Sweetgrass, yes, go there. Beautiful lessons from nature and indigeneity on everything, parenting, sense of self, how we move forward in the world. It's a beautiful book and a beautiful listen as well.
Yeah, that chapter, I think, on the hungry ghosts, is one of the most powerful things I've ever listened to. I don't read it. I don't read it anymore.
Yeah, and she's got a beautiful, soothing voice. So if you do like audiobooks, Robin Wall Kimmerer is a great listen.
Gotcha. Do you have any books?
I do. I have one on sexual violence prevention, one on curricular approaches to learning beyond the classroom, and I have one on unmasking toward authentic masculinity. I think that's over there on the bookshelf somewhere. Yeah, right there. And the unmasking is really how we do a lot of the things that we talked about, particularly around for men and engaging the men in your lives. And we all have men in our lives. And how do we help them get more free from these external expectations, which benefits everyone?
Great. And those are also available from your website if people want to go looking?
Yeah, you can find all of that stuff there.
Terrific.
Yeah, everything's on the website. Yeah, go to the website. And also, there's a contact form on my website. No one else sees that. It just goes to me. So if anybody wants to reach out to me, just use that contact form. Just generates an email to me, and I will absolutely respond. Would love to connect.
Awesome. Keith Edwards, thank you so much for the work you do in the world, for yourself, and for taking the time for this delightful and uplifting conversation. It's a balm for my soul.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's been great to connect with you. I'm so glad when I was in Barcelona with the family, we got to meet up for breakfast and meet in person. And I was really looking forward to this conversation, and it has exceeded my expectations. So thanks so much, Howie, for the work that you do in the world and all the people you give voice to and all the people that you're reaching. You are absolutely making a difference. So thank you.
Thank you. I hear that. Be well. I'll see you again soon.
See you soon.
And that's a wrap. You can find the show notes for today's episode at plantyourself.com/618. That's 618. Movement news, not a lot going on because of this respiratory infection that has had me down on the ropes. Yesterday, I went for a very gentle, light workout. Jay was very kind to me. We did not do any running. It was just a simple circuit 5 times. And even that, I was out of breath, getting a little bit lightheaded. So this is going to be a long recovery road. We have a beach tournament coming up in 2.5 weeks in Alicante. And then there's a grass tournament in Girona, so I hope to be better, at least for the grass tournament. So playing some good ultimate. That's about it. I got some great guests coming up. We're talking about global issues, about the state of the world, and about what each of us can do to make it a better place. If you are looking for support, if you are trying to achieve great things and you're not sure how to get there, or you can see obstacles in your way, that's what I do. I do executive leadership coaching, and I would love to talk. You can reach out, find me at my practice website, askhowie.com. Drop me a line, and we'll talk. All right, that's it. As always, be well, my friends.